Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cyber Defense in the Critical World of Water virtual panel. My name is Christian Cruz, and I'm in charge of market development at Avaka Networks. Before we get started today, I just want to mention a few items. Today's session is being recorded. We'll kick things off first with a formal panel, followed by Q&A. So your audio, just a reminder, your audio and video will be muted by default. So when we get to the Q&A portion, we'll ask that you post your questions in the chat box, and we'll get through as many as time permits. The panelists today will be Brian Keith, Protective Security Advisor at CISA and U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Ivo Quenji, Information Systems Manager at Las Virgenes Municipal Water District, Paul Fuller, CEO at Allied Public Risk, and Kevin McDonald, COO and CISO at Avaka Networks. So with that said, I will turn it over to Kevin and we can get started.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Brian, Ivo, and Paul for coming today. You know, I made a statement the other day that I want to make here. We talk about infrastructure, we talk about IT, we talk about the privacy of people's records, we talk about water as a sort of general sense of maybe shortages in the state of California, but we really don't talk about the fact that next to oxygen, it's the most important thing to human existence. And we all need to take the protection of our water availability, reliability, and safety very seriously. And one of the reasons we decided to have this conversation today is there's a lot of talk around typical IT and big corporations and food distribution and all these issues, but water just doesn't seem to get enough attention. So I have been in cyber for 2 decades, focused heavily in infrastructure and the security of our nation's most required and needed resources for the past probably 12 years. The folks that are on this panel, a couple of them I've known for a very long time, and I'm new to Ivo, and thank you, Ivo, for agreeing to join us today. So what we're going to talk about is we're going to let each one of these folks give you their viewpoint of what they do. They are the consummate professionals in their area, and so I hope that you'll get something of value out of today's conversation. With that said, Brian, why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay, great. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Christian, for setting this up for us this morning. I want to say hello to everyone here that's in attendance. Again, my name is Brian Keith, and I am a Protective Security Advisor for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. That's a mouthful, but we go by the term CISA. And we're not a new agency. We just rebranded our name back in 2018. But as Kevin mentioned, you know, the relationship goes, you know, far back, several years. We worked with Kevin and Avaka Systems, Network Systems, for several years now as partners. But a little bit more about CISA for those of you that are attending that may not be aware of our organization. So we are a component within the Department of Homeland Security. As our title states, we are the lead domestic agency for cybersecurity. We work with all 16 of our critical infrastructure sectors. My role here in the LA area as a protective security advisor is to work with all of our private partners, critical infrastructure sector owner and operators to help secure their sites. We do that both on the cyber front as well as on the physical security front. So I'm not a network systems guy by background. My background is physical security, but I know enough about cyber because of all of the assessments that I do to be dangerous. But I'm going to talk at a very high level and kind of put things into context today to kind of set up our discussion. So within the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, we do have an intelligence component that puts out weekly threat briefings on all of the infrastructure that we are monitoring. We also work very closely with the DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis. And I want to briefly focus on 2 reports that we recently released. And I'm going to share my screen here just briefly so that we can look at a couple of these reports that came out. The first one I'm going to talk about actually came out in May of 2021, so May of last year. This report came out again from the DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis. It is an unclassified for official use only report, FOUO. And it's titled Malicious Cyber Actors Likely to Continue Exploiting Vulnerabilities in Water and Wastewater Systems Networks. So really, we put this document out last week out to our water and wastewater partners to really talk about and highlight some of the vulnerabilities that we are seeing and some of the cyber attacks that are happening within the water sector and wastewater sector. Some key things that were pointed out in this document, two incidents that I'll draw your attention to. The first one being an incident that happened in February of 2021. Unidentified cyber actors exploited unsecured remote access software to gain unauthorized access to the industrial control system at a U.S. drinking water treatment plant in Oldsmar, Florida. Now, with this particular incident, the cyber actors gained full access to the plant's virtual human machine interface, their HMI, and used that access to increase the amount of sodium hydroxide, also known as lye, in the water treatment process. The plant personnel at the plant did notice the change on their SCADA system and their dosing amounts. They were able to correct the issue before the ICS software detected the manipulation and then shut the system down to unsafe conditions. Another incident that happened back in 2018 was the incident that happened at the Onslow Water and Sewer Authority in Jacksonville, North Carolina. This was a ransomware attack. It was the REAC ransomware. According to the facility, the attack forced the facility to perform many previously automated processes manually, which greatly degraded the timeliness and efficiency of the facility for weeks following the attack. The facility decided not to pay the ransom, but what that did was that required them to completely rebuild their databases and systems to restore access, according to several media reports. So within this report, we also talk about geopolitical tensions between Iran and Israel and some of the Iranian cyber attacks that have happened. So we are seeing, again, attacks happening from nation state actors that are out there. So this is a great document. It talks about that. If anyone's interested in getting a copy of that, we'll make sure we push that out to Kevin so he can push it out to the group. The second document that I want to bring to your attention is a report that we put out in February of this year, just a couple of months ago. This one, again, was released at the unclassified for official use only level, and it's titled California Water and Wastewater Sector Remains Attractive Target for Cyber Actors. And this particular report really focused on the state of California and some of the activity that we are seeing. Again, we assess that the California water and wastewater sector will likely remain an attractive target for a range of cyber actors seeking to exploit enduring vulnerabilities to achieve their financial, geopolitical, and ideological objectives. A couple of incidents I'll point out here that happened that we were tracking. First one was in August of 2021. Unidentified cyber actors compromised a California water sector entity's network, inhibiting automation of water control systems for an unspecified period of time. The cyber actors exploited a vulnerability in the virtual private network and ran a malicious code to delete volume shadow copies on the network's primary domain controller and supervisory control and data acquisition server. So again, this is another example of what we've been talking about. Our cyber actors, again, exploiting those vulnerabilities, those known vulnerabilities. The second incident happened in June of 2021. This was a group that compromised a California-based water sector entity through a phishing attack through a municipal government employee. Basically, that employee opened up an email that contained a link to preview a PDF that basically launched malicious code onto that server network, and then which compromised their network system. So I know we're going to get into some discussion here, but I also want to talk about some of the resources that CISA has made available to talk about some of these threats. This is one of the items that our office did put out. It's titled Cyber Risk and Resources for the Water and Wastewater System Sector. And really what this infographic is trying to drive home is the point that what we are seeing is that information technology is now being used as a vector to go after the operational technology within the water and wastewater sector networks. So using things like phishing attempts, known vulnerabilities on systems that have not been updated or patched. That's the way our cyber actors are getting in, and the whole issue of convergence. They're coming in through the cyber interface and attacking the physical interface at these facilities. So this information graphic really does a really good job of explaining the impacts of that. And then down at the bottom, we will see a list of resources that are available. CISA has their Cyber Sources Hub. You can go to www.cisa.gov. There's a range of free and immediately cybersecurity resources that we have online, including the Cyber Essentials Toolkit, talks about cyber hygiene and some of the basic things that your organization can do to ensure that it's keeping itself protected against these attacks. So with that, Kevin, I'm going to hand it back over to you to introduce our next panelist, but hopefully that kind of sets the landscape a little bit and puts things into context with this threat that we're tracking.
It does, and as we conclude the early part of the panel, I want to make some comments on our recent experience at Avaka Networks on the whole dealing with Ryuk and Conti and of course now the new Onyx deletion. But Ivo, I want to introduce you quickly. Ivo is with Las Virgenes Water. He is what I know to be a pioneer in what we see in technology and water and advancing efficiencies. He is now out in front of one of the more important water organizations in the state of California. And so we're very excited to hear from him. Ivo, why don't you give us a quick background on yourself and then a piece of your opinions about what we're seeing today.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Paul. And of course, Brian. That's going to be a little bit tough to follow, but hey, I'll try my best. Again, my name is Ivo Kwenji. I'm the Information Systems Manager over here at the Las Virgenes Municipal Water District. My background is in water engineering. I hold a Bachelor of Engineering degree in water resources and environmental engineering. And I also moved into the information systems realm through geographic information systems. And over the course of the years, I have implemented information systems, business systems, critical infrastructure systems, enterprise resource management systems for municipalities, and worked on SCADA systems, supervisory control, and data acquisition. And more recently, with the Las Virgenes Municipal Water District, I'm the information systems manager and more focused on communications network systems and SCADA systems, and trying to see how we can secure this critical infrastructure, of course, being water and wastewater. And my talk today is going to be more focused on what we're doing as an entity, dealing with a critical infrastructure like water. I will share a few PowerPoint slides to guide the discussion, and then we'll go from there. I hope we all see that. That's the intro slide. Yeah, we heard Brian talking about the threat sources. So I just wanted to use this slide to highlight some of them. Once again, just to do some highlighting. Activist monkey wrenching and people doing digital vigilante. He brought up the issue of the old small water in Florida. We all know what happened over there. people trying to compromise a remote access system to change the dosage of lag. And that could have been a really huge disaster for those for that community. Of course, foreign nation space-sponsored entities. We all remember the Stuxnet and the Stuxnet incident between Israel and Iran. 2020 Russian SolarWinds hack. And of course, more recently, 2021 Colonial Pipeline. 2021 seemed to be a very busy year. We've seen criminal profiteering where people are trying to use identity fraud and credit card fraud and cryptocurrency. And then, of course, I always say this, we may talk about foreign nations activists and criminal profiteers, but the biggest source of our vulnerabilities for an entity dealing with cybersecurity is the employees, vendors, and contractors, people we deal with a lot and give them access to our systems. And some of them may be untrained or negligent, and if they're disgruntled or malicious, they may just try to do something to harm the system. But I highlighted the foreign nation and state-sponsored entities' role to bring to the forefront what we're dealing with, given the situation we have in Eastern Europe between Russia and Ukraine. And so there's a heightened alert on critical infrastructure, water being one of the most important now. So how are we dealing with this? The other day we were discussing, and one of the talk was, as an information systems manager or a cybersecurity officer, how do you handle all of these things? The talk was deer in a headlight. So we get all of these things thrown at us. How do we deal with them? So I'll try and share our approach. The approach we want to do is try and categorize these things into people, processes, and then technology and services. So with that, on people, what are we talking about? The staffing. Who are you? Do you have a security? Do you have people on your security staff, on your IT staff? When I first got here, we just had people dealing with the network and SCADA. We had to do some work working with our management and the board to get staffing for security. Other organizations, we've just heard about CISA, and then there's MSISAC, the FBI, etc. We try and establish relationships with these people to make sure we're on the right track. Consultants and vendors. I cannot emphasize this enough. You cannot do it on your own. You have the insurance provider, professional services providers that will give you guidance on the way forward. On processes, staff training is really huge. Again, I emphasize the weak link that you may have in employees clicking on the wrong link or opening up their phones and clicking on a link in a text message. So we make sure communications on that front is really huge. Staff training, standards and guides. What kinds of standards do you have? Are you using the NIST or you're using the CIS? So you got to try and pick one. There's no wrong approach, but pick an approach and go with it while cleaning up the edges. Assessments and penetration testing. Though listed as the third item, I think that's one of the biggest things that any organization should really consider not just penetration testing, but assessment. Do an assessment. An assessment helps you to know where your assets are and what the vulnerabilities are. And it also gives you approaches that you could take on governance and your patch management and so many other aspects of cybersecurity and cybersecurity defense. Event reporting, internal. So what processes do you have internally for people who notice things that are not right? We always say, see something, say something. You have to, define a protocol internally to handle that. Then incident response, very big one. If you haven't done so, put something together on incident response. If you have an incident, what are you doing? Who are you contacting? Do the who, what, when, how. Have all of that in place, and it's not just a document. It's a plan. It's not just a document. Make sure you exercise it. We try here to have one every month. It could be a desktop exercise. It could be, after a desktop, and then you do what you schedule an actual incident. Someone said it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you would have something. So it's very important to keep all of these practices going and then fill in the gaps. Backups and restoration. This is what we used to do in the days in the last 20 plus years, just making sure you do backups. Now, people take backups, but have you ever tried to do a restoration? Yeah, so make sure you have that in place. And if you do your backups, test out your restorations. Business continuity and disaster recovery. Do you have that plan as part of your enterprise, of your emergency response plan? I touched a little bit of hiring and onboarding. When we hire, especially people who have to deal with our network and cyber infrastructure, the background check is a little bit more intense than other employees. And the onboarding process, there's a training that we issue. It's a must. You have to take the cyber training, and we have another one. It's a 5 to 10 minute training for cell phone use. So district cell phone use. How do you do how can you be saved? It doesn't only save the employee, the district, but save the employee, from getting hacked on their private lives. So we try and do that. And then on the technology and services end, like I mentioned before, you can't do it by yourself. If you think you can do it by yourself, you're in the wrong area. There's the perimeter, how to get into your system, and then what you do internally. And I have some examples of those. So on the perimeter end, for intrusion detection and intrusion prevention, from the so many things that we do, we work with MSISAC on the malicious domain blocking and reporting. It has really become a really good instrument for us. Because when we get weekly updates, we look at the reporting and see what's going on and where we can improve. That's from the outside getting in. And then, of course, the security information and event management monitoring from the inside. There are tools out there that you can get. I just list a few. There's so many out there. Backtrace, Tenable, and you have to be specific. Since we're dealing with infrastructure, do not just look at the IT side, because the IT, yeah, it's good for securing data and personal identifiable information, but these tools have modules for the operational technology side, how you secure your SCADA system and your PLCs and how they communicate. More and more, IT and OT, they're almost becoming one. So as security technicians and analysts and specialists, we want to look at things holistically. Here at the district, IT and OT, we're lucky IT and OT fall under one umbrella and under the Information Systems Manager. Make sure there's a comprehensive patching program going. And endpoint detection. With COVID and people working remotely, we issue out laptops and people try to do things remotely. What kind of antivirus system do you have? Now, does it just detect incidents or occurrence and stays there? You may want to have something that also does the response. It catches it and then reports to someone who can take an action. So I gave you there's a few examples there: Silence, CrowdStrike. There's a ton of them out there. What has really become a great topic of discussion recently is the multi-factor authentication. Though it has been around for, I would say, at least more than 10 years, but recently it's become like the big thing. You don't want to do multi-factor authentication only on emails with Office 365 and email access. Multi-factor authentication for VPN has become very vital because one of the vulnerabilities that is being exploited is, is credentials, employee credentials. Once they have your username and your password, they can get into your system. If your VPN does not have MFA, you'll be compromised. But if you have one where they have to maybe send some authentication to your cell phone, then you'll be good there. Social engineering training tools. We have KnowBe4, Kali Linux. There's some of them out there. Look into that. In constant training. Do not train employees just once or your staff and call it a day. It has to be constant because people need constant reminders. I had mentioned about standards on one of the other slides. When we did our assessments, we standardized on the NIST cybersecurity framework. And with that, they have the identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And so if you look at this slide going from left to right, with all of those elements within it, you improve on your maturity as you go from left to right. So configuring in configuration management and change control, and all the elements, vulnerability management and multi-factor authentication under the protect, then detect. What are you doing in terms of for network admissions and control, scanning, and then by the time you're responding, that's where you have your incident response plan and backup and recovery, business continuity, do contingency planning. And I wanted to close this with something that I had picked up from the AWWA cybersecurity guidance in 2019 that talks about maturity, because we started off with the deer in the headlight. So with something like this, having implemented a few of those items that I listed, you can kind of gauge where your organization is. Where did you start and where are you now? And remember, you don't stop. It's a continuous process. You keep going until you get to a point where you can sleep at night knowing that you have the tools to respond. Not that you will never be attacked, but you have the tools if you're attacked that you'll be able to respond. And that would be the end of my presentation there, and then I'll hand it back.
Thank you, Ivo.
And yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ivo. So our next presenter is going to be Paul Fuller. Paul, I'm going to let you do the intro because you're better at it. I've worked with Paul quite a bit over the last couple of years, and have come to be a fan of his ability and his knowledge. So Paul, please go ahead and give a quick intro of who you are, what you do, and what you have to say today.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kevin, and hello, everyone. So I'm a licensed water operator, and I focus exclusively on the insurance side or risk transfer side with public entities in general and water-related entities in particular. Been doing this for 2 decades plus. Our organization insures over 4,000 water-related entities throughout the country for a combined premium of approximately $150 million. So my focus today is to talk about the state of the cybersecurity insurance marketplace. And I'll be tying back to the threats that Kevin, Brian, and Ivo have highlighted. So to begin with, the marketplace is bad. It's as bad as California wildfire. And the primary reason is ransomware attacks. Now, these attacks, they're systemic across all industries, but they're particularly pronounced with water-related entities. And there's two reasons for that. Unfortunately, there's a perception with the bad actors that water-related entities have insufficient security standards. And then second, they know they can extort a greater demand because they know that your service is essential to your communities. You cannot be offline. And that unfortunate combination has led to a dislocation in the insurance marketplace. What we're seeing in terms of cybersecurity insurance renewals is a doubling of premium, a doubling of rate, and we're also seeing compressed limits and additional exclusions, including sometimes ransomware itself. And what I just shared, that's for insureds without cyber losses. So there are solutions. And what I'd like to do is speak to a solution from a trade group called Cal Mutual's J Prima that I'm affiliated with. And this solution, it's not complicated and it can be replicated across any industry. So in our case, we reached agreement with Lloyd's of London. They're a prominent writer of cybersecurity insurance. And our agreement was pretty straightforward. Lloyd's agreed to freeze the rate increases. They agreed to freeze the deductible increases. And ultimately, what they gave us was comprehensive coverage at an affordable price that included policyholder services such as a partnership with Alvaca. So net plus for sure, but it comes with some pain. And in return, Lloyd's required that we elevated the eligibility for this product to only those water-related entities that augmented their security standards. Examples of that would be heightened patching from a firm like Alvaca. It would include multi-factor authentication, as well as an air gap between IT and OT systems. Nothing, in my opinion, is out of bounds. Nothing is unreasonable. And I think Lloyd's got the balance right because they realize, since they have been paying hundreds of millions of dollars of ransomware payments over the last few years, that the only way to offer an affordable and properly designed cybersecurity insurance policy is through effective mitigation. You can't have the former without the latter. So just in the interest of time, I want to make sure we've got plenty of time for Q&A. I'd like to wrap up by just reaffirming the obvious. Insurance does not prevent or mitigate cyber attacks. Insurance will not fully restore your reputation or goodwill after a cyber attack. But a properly designed cybersecurity insurance policy will provide financial protection, but it will also provide a team of experts, privacy attorneys, crisis managers, patching professionals, data forensic professionals, and others to help you through the drama if there is a breach. And you can't assemble this team on the fly. It needs to be assembled. It needs to be formulated before a breach. So my final takeaway, my throwdown statement, is that the only way to secure an affordable and properly designed cybersecurity insurance policy is to elevate your security standards. There's no other way. I would argue augmenting security supersedes the purchase of an insurance policy, but the two should be blended together as a comprehensive mitigation and financial transfer solution if in the event you are breached, even after significant upgrades to your security standards. And ultimately, the cost of elevating your security standards, and also the cost of buying a cybersecurity insurance policy that is properly designed. It has to be viewed by you and the board of directors as a mandatory cost of doing business. So Kevin, that's a brief encapsulation of the state of the marketplace, solutions, and kind of final comments on my end. Anything you'd like to share before we open it up for Q&A?
I will. There's a couple of things I want to reinforce, and I want to make sure we have at least 20 minutes, so I'll do this very quickly. First of all, patching has been stated here a few times. We have been doing ransomware rescue for many years now in very small, all the way up to tens of thousands, or actually in one case, 100,000 plus seats globally. So there are some factors that are common in those. Lack of patching can be something that we all have to just get our heads around. You cannot leave machines vulnerable. Admin rights being used for non-admin functions and not having separate accounts for administration. You have to assume when you're doing your planning, and I mean this, absolutely assume they have domain level, super, what I call the God rights to a network, and they're you. So if you aren't planning for that, your backup has to be isolated, the documentation and functional credentials have to be isolated. You cannot assume that because somehow your credentials are secure, they're not going to get them. They get them almost every time. So in order for backup to function, it has to be isolated and protected. You have to make sure that your 2FA covers not just access into the network, because malware today will get you into a network almost assuredly. So you need to make sure that your SU and operational functions and your application functions on each individual part of the network also requires an additional layer of 2FA, because assume they're going to get in. The question is, how far are they going to get in, and where are they going to get in while they're there? The other thing that's really important is the point of endpoint protection. Over 80% of the infections that we've seen in the past had endpoint, and it was up to date. Now, it might have had a couple of machines that were missing, but they usually weren't the cause. It was a vulnerability that was 0-day that was missed by the typical antivirus. So you have to make sure that you have layering. You have to make sure that you have endpoint that functions in an autonomous and what it's called a machine learning functionality. And then you also have to make sure you have a team that's ready to respond, because if you get a bunch of noise, there's been multiple public cases where the SIEM or the endpoint protection gave heads up, something's up, and it was there for a while and nobody paid attention. We're seeing events in ransomware that go from 0 to encryption in hours. It used to be days, weeks. It's now hours, minutes to hours. And the other thing that's really important to understand is even if you have a backup, and even if you have insurance, it's generally at least a week in any environment before you get back up. It can be multiple weeks, and then it can be a year or longer before you're back to quote normal. So this is no joke. This isn't something you can insure against, and it's very important that we all understand the intensity and the importance of this. So let's open it up. I do want to say Avaka Networks has been doing remediation forever. I'm not here to sell you on anything, but I'll let you know, if you get into a ransomware situation, there's a few things you cannot do. And if you have questions about what you should or should not be doing immediately after you discover an event or think you have one, please give us a call, because mistakes we've seen early in a response have caused an inability to recover or a much more painful recovery. So with that said, Christian, you want to go ahead and open it up to questions?
Yes, so just a reminder, if anybody has any questions, just please feel free to post them in the chat box and we'll just go through them as they come in.
So with that said, I want to, since we're waiting on those, I want to do a real quick question. Hey, Brian, from your perspective, the Ukraine-Russia situation on our side, for sure, we've seen a slowdown, and we believe it's because, over 85% of all cryptocurrency went to Russia and Ukraine actors. So they're busy and distracted right now. I also think they're going to be very upset with the United States and others in the West. What is your anticipation of once they are no longer distracted? Are we really facing even potentially just destructive attacks rather than financially motivated attacks?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Kevin. And so within CISA, we put out some advisories very early on before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we continue to put out advisories almost weekly now The title of our outreach is called Shields Up, and if you go to the CISA.gov website, you can get access to the full Shields Up campaign, which really focuses on this particular threat stream and what we are seeing. What are the TTPs or trends, tactics, and procedures that we are currently seeing? What does it mean for our infrastructure owners and operators and our partners? What are things that they can do to mitigate? So we put those advisories out almost weekly now on different vulnerabilities that we are seeing being exploited. Again, like you mentioned, Kevin, it's probably a matter of a lot of these, cyber threat actors and nation state actors are focusing on other areas right now. But again, we do continue to see this as an ongoing threat. So we will continue to push out advisories to our partners. And if anyone needs any additional information on those resources, Kevin, just let me know. We can definitely push the link out through your group.
Fantastic. So thank you for that. I have a question that says, how long in advance for CISA to do an evaluation for OT and IT? How long do people need to plan for if they're going to ask for your help?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I'll talk a little bit briefly about our sister organization within the department. We have our cybersecurity division, which we have a cybersecurity advisor here in Southern California and in Region 9, which covers California, Nevada, Arizona, and then Hawaii and the Pacific Territories. So they have a menu list of resources that they can provide, such as penetration testing, or they have cyber hygiene products or self-evaluation tools that they can push out. But for them to actually get a cybersecurity advisor out to do an actual vulnerability assessment at an organization, there's probably at least a couple months lead up time to do that. Unfortunately, we just don't have the manpower to go out right away and immediately do that. So we're building that component, we're building that capability. But if anyone's interested in that, by all means, please get in touch with me and I'll put you in touch with our cybersecurity advisory team.
Thank you for that. Next question is for Paul. It says, Paul mentioned about having a gap between OT and IT. Can you provide some examples for that?
Yeah, I think, Kevin, this would be one, Ivo, for you to give a little background as to how lost version is without going into too much information. How are you segregating the information technology systems, your software, with the, with the hardware, if you will, your SCADA system operating your utility?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Paul. I mentioned in my presentation that IT and OT are coming together in recent times, and when you're designing your network, that air gap becomes a really critical issue. And so what we have been able to do is to create what they used to call in the IT world a DMZ. So you create a DMZ environment where if there is a necessity for traffic to go through, it's essentially an air gap. It's a drop and then there's a peak. So that's the kind of practice that is being prescribed by the NIST and recent network engineers, where it's essentially an air gap. The traffic that goes through is designed to drop a package in the DMZ, which is an area between the IT network and the OT network, and then the packet gets picked up on the other side. There are numerous architecture out there that, if anyone's interested, I can share that with them on how to accomplish that.
Very good. The question here is, Paul mentioned heightened patching. What does that involve? And I'm going to go ahead and take that if you don't mind, Paul. So what we're seeing in many environments is a lack of consistent patching and a lack of what we would call validation and verification of the patching. The involvement that we have with Cal Mutual's J. Prima and Lloyd's of London was to go through a process of describing what we consider to be an enterprise level patch operation. And Alvaca is what we would call the gold standard, I would say, in this relationship at this point. Others can be chosen, but they have to be able to do it in a level that we do. And what that requires is that, one, you know the inventory that you have, two, that the patches are applied, not just your operating system patches, but any patches that could be required to close vulnerabilities on systems, with some verification methodology that says not only did the operation of pushing a patch happen, but were the vulnerabilities closed, and that is an exercise that is monitored and audited on a regular basis. So patching is more than just push a patch and pray. Automated updates, for example, generally only cover, for example, the Microsoft operating system or the Apple OS. It does not cover many of your browsers and third-party applications. In fact, I think there are many hundreds that we cover in our process. And so when they say updated or heightened patching, it means doing it properly and covering all your bases. The next question was, does CISA offer advice on any specific procedures to evaluate level 0 sensor monitoring?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that our cyber team will look at, our cybersecurity advisors will look at when they come out and conduct an assessment. First thing they will do is basically, have the facility do kind of a self-cyber assessment, and then identify those standards that they want to get validated against. And then they will look at specific threats that you may be concerned about. And then again, they'll be able to pull from a list of different assessment resources that they have to specifically nail down what it is that you're interested in. So definitely, if you're interested in doing that, please let Kevin know, let me know. We can definitely put you in touch with our cybersecurity advisor team.
Fantastic, thank you. I do want to bring up one thing that came to mind as we were talking as well. Typical breach, typical data loss, and typical ransomware generally resolves around either having a good backup for recovery or paying a ransom and getting a recovery. Well, some of the recent threat actors, Onyx to name one, is now, and they may have fixed this, there's some rumors, but we're not sure. So what we do know is the early Onyx ransomware would encrypt any file that was smaller than 2.5 megs, but anything larger than that, it would just delete it and overwrite it. So without your backup, even if you pay the ransom, you've lost, in many cases, much of what you would deem as critical. So it has become absolutely paramount that you stop as a group. The nation has to, and the world has to get over the fact that insurance and simply trying to pay ransoms is a way to recovery. It often is not. We've had Dharma ransomware, for example, in the past, was a very unreliable threat actor group, and they often failed to do the encryption properly, or they had a failed process of recovery. The government is doing its job many times. Many don't know, but there are multiple federal government agencies now chasing down ransomware. Well, what does that mean? That means if they find an operation of a botnet, or more importantly, command and control that's involved in doing ransomware delivery, that involves you making a payment, then sending down a decryption key. Well, if law enforcement takes down that server, you no longer have access to it. So you could pay it, they have your money, government takes down the server, you don't get decryption keys. They often will close up shop and run away because they think that the government or international law enforcement is getting too close. Backup and disaster recovery and true business continuity planning are really the only solution, and you seriously need to take this as if it could be the end of your organization. We have seen several what I would consider to be important businesses go out of business. Some, a couple of them were more than 150 years old and disappeared because of ransomware. So it's not a joke. It's not something to take lightly. The next question is, Brian, are any discussions at CISA to perhaps have a national centralized security operations center for the water industry, similar to what Israel has done?
Great question. I have not heard of that being proposed as of yet. I would imagine that's something that the department will probably look into with our other federal partners that are tasked at looking at cybersecurity. We do have other local initiatives, not on the national level, but we do have other local initiatives that are focusing on this issue, kind of a one-stop shop, if you will. Here in LA, we have the our neighborhood or Cyberhood Watch program, which is with the FBI, which is an all-sector kind of information sharing program, if you will, that the FBI will put together a task force made up of all the different agencies that are kind of working with our infrastructure partners, and to look at what are the threats that are out there, what are some of the attacks that are happening, and then apply those investigative resources through the task force to look at some of those incidents. The other plug that I want to make for is the Water ISAC. I know Ivo talked about the MS ISAC. There's also the Water ISAC. The Water ISAC is another great organization if you're already not a member. Just coincidentally, they just did a briefing last week on cyber threats to the water sector. They're going to hold that again on June 29th. So if anyone's interested in that or interested in becoming a member of the Water ISAC, then go to their website, which is info@watersac.org. You can send them an email and find out more about that organization and get access to some of the threat briefings that they have.
That's terrific. All right. Well, so we have about 7 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure everybody had a time to make some closing comments based on what we have. I want to reinforce that all of us are available. The one thing I can tell you again, and I can't say this enough, you need a phone number, and I would be happy to be that number, to be the first call. We have relationships with recovery that we do. We have IR partners. We have significant relationships with law enforcement and insurance groups and lawyers. And we've been doing this a long time, and we really can help you from making a mistake. But whoever you choose them now, and don't try to choose them later. Ivo, why don't you go first on your final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thoughts would be keep it constant, keep it at the top of your head. Whatever you do, keep your communications with your management, your board, your employees. Keep the discussion going. Set up some time within the month where you set out reminders on cybersecurity. Keep your relationships with external organizations, your insurance broker, your professional services provider. Keep that constant. I cannot emphasize enough what Kevin just mentioned about the phone call. Make sure that list gets updated on a timely basis, and standardize yourself and look at that standard all the time.
And please don't try to fix it yourself. I cannot tell you how many times, just by asking, even if we don't help you long term, the few minutes in the front end of this can save you from a lot of pain. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just reaffirm to the group here that insurance is not a panacea. It provides meaningful protection, but it's limited as to what its purpose is intended to be. The best analogy, using a train, the engine is the security standards. It's the augmentation of your security. Insurance is the caboose. And there needs to be an understanding. Buying insurance does not solve the problem. It does not make the problem go away. It's an integral part of the reimbursement and the team of experts, but that's the extent of insurance.
Very good. Brian, please. And I do want to make sure also that you give a little bit of information on the fact that people sharing information with CISA can be secure, because there is a law that says you're not allowed to share what you find with anybody else in the federal government. I know there's a lot of paranoia around having, DHS coming in and helping. So please cover that if you might.
Yes, absolutely, Kevin. Thank you again. So I just want to foot stomp everything that everybody said on our panel today, both Ivo, Paul, and Kevin as well. It's really about that maturation process that Ivo mentioned. Starting out with having that inventory, right? You don't, if you can't protect if you don't know what you have. So developing that inventory, finding out what systems that you have, what's critical to your day-to-day operations. And then really what I like to focus on is what Paul just mentioned, is just closing that convergence gap, if you will, right? It's making sure that your OT folks are talking to your IT folks, the engineers are involved, your physical security folks are involved, that everybody is communicating, because the last thing you want during an incident is, kind of the finger pointing and blaming, and not being able to work cohesively as a team. So the other thing that I'll mention is, once you've had a chance to look at your inventory and figure out what it is you're trying to protect, train all of your employees. Keep training them. That is key. They have to be trained. They have to constantly be trained and updated. And then exercising your plans. You're going to perform the way that your plans are written, so you need to know if they're up to date, if they're covering the most recent threats and trends, tactics, and procedures that are out there. And the best way to do that is to exercise those plans. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Kevin.
Thank you. So I'm going to reinforce, please, patch, backup that's isolated, get your plan, get it ready. Go ahead.
One more thing, Kevin, I forgot to mention. You did mention the importance of CISA being able to protect the information that's out there. So I do want to talk about the PCII program, Protected Critical Infrastructure Information. So one key thing to note for our audience today is that CISA, we are required to adhere by PCII standards. So anything that we do when we come out, meet with you, whether we're doing an interview, we're doing an assessment, or we're taking photographs or anything, we are required by law to protect that information under the PCII program. And what that does is that protects your information at your facility against any Freedom of Information Act requests, FOIA requests, or just your adversaries getting access to that information, or even competitors. So I want to mention that because that is a process that we put into place within DHS and CISA, and we want to make sure that everyone's aware that that is out there, so that you're aware of what we're doing to secure your information. Thanks, Kevin, for reminding me.
Thank you for that, and thank you everybody for coming along. I appreciate that note. We are right on time, and so this has been recorded. We do recommend that you share it with folks that may want to see this, and share the message. It's really important that, as I said in the beginning, nothing in the world to us other than oxygen is more important than water, and we all have to take this seriously. So we're here to help. And feel free to reach out. We have contacts, as I said before, and we're always happy to help whether or not we get engaged.